Our final speaker for this plenary session is Simon Cardy.
Thank you very much, Rich. Just for introduction, there's a picture up here which has been on the last few minutes, showing some of the campaigning we've done recently outside Birmingham County Court. And interestingly, you see the doors of the council house are closed because every time we organise a lobby or a protest, they close the door because they think we're going to occupy it. So you're not the only place where that's happening. What I want to do is to talk a little bit about the sort of things that we can do and the sort of things that we in the West Midlands have been doing under the SWAN banner. It should be up here actually, but it's on the floor. I'm going to talk about two of our recent campaigns, one in Solihull and one around G4S. They're based on the campaigning model of social work. They're using conventional methods you would find typically in any part of the labour and trade union movements. They're somewhat modest in scale. They have always had the potential to grow, of course, as much as they can to fade away. And often we might have 10 ideas and only one might get off the ground. But we have to start somewhere, and often that somewhere is right in front of us. I should perhaps begin by commenting a little bit about what we mean by the term radical social work. Radical social work is often interchangeably used with terms like critical social work, feminist social work, anti-racial work, social work, and so on. And I think we in SWAN ought to add another term to this, anti-capitalist social work, which is a lot of what we're doing now is anti-capitalist. This is partly because the term radical has been stolen from us. It's often presented as something conservative as radical. And in fact, we've seen many of these terms, like community and empowerment, taken away from us. And we need to reclaim that. That have, to some extent, lost some of its meaning. Now, there's some interesting theoretical stuff. Paul Garrett's book, which was launched last night, I wasn't here, but that's got some really interesting stuff which we need to draw upon. One of the issues it raises is how capitalism has this ability to absorb our critique and opposition to it. Chapter 10, page 187, for those of you taking notes, which I would urge you to look at. And Paul's work on the war of position as well, and Gramsci, is very useful for us in our campaigning work. So I want to make a bit of a plug as a practitioner and as a campaigner for using theory and integrating the two. I think it's really important. And Paul's got some really interesting and useful things to say about social work practices, which I was hoping to talk a bit about today, but I think Maureen Wade, my comrade, talked a little bit about that yesterday. So doing radical social work, however, even as we in this audience might understand it, is not straightforward. It involves taking ourselves out of our comfort zone. It involves blowing the whistle. It involves sticking our heads above the water. It involves taking risks. And as students, it means challenging our practice supervisors. As social workers, it means confronting our managers. And as service users, it means challenging our social workers. All of these things are difficult, but then no one ever said that social work was easy, least of all something that we might loosely understand as being radical. Okay. Solihull. The story in Solihull was that in 2011 the council was looking for soft targets to make cuts. Now, its problem at that time was that its grant aid from the UK Border Agency that helped local authorities accommodate undocumented children was being slashed by 23%. Solihull, being in the catchment area of an airport, at that time had 40% of all its children in care were looked after by that authority. And the council proposed to revise its level of service by moving child asylum seekers from foster care at 16 and moving them into independence. It did not propose to do this for any other child in the system. And here's the extract from the officer's report. And it said, the revised service model will result in differential and less favourable treatment of unaccompanied children in care and care leavers compared to local citizen children. And the officers were obviously quite open and upfront about that. They were being discriminatory. We felt that this was such an injustice, something it could not go unchallenged. So within West Midlands SWAN we started to organise against it. And we took various strategic decisions in mounting this campaign. First, we thought we should target the border agency as the core of the problem, and by making the key demand that the grant aid should be restored. This, we hoped, would deflect attention onto the source of the problem, and in doing so make the Solihull social workers feel that this wasn't an attack on them. Secondly, we felt it was crucial in this case to work jointly with other organisations. And in planning the campaign, we teamed up with two local Unison branches and a CERT, which is a local independent organisation supporting asylum seekers, Asylum Support Immigration Support Team. We've got a very good website. We then took three key bits of action. First, we issued a set of written practice notes and asked Unison to distribute them onto social workers' desks. We didn't really have any access. We'd had no SWAN activists or SWAN members in those asylum seeking teams. So it was a bit of a problem. But by working with Unison were able to put our practice notes and guidance about what to do about the situation on social workers' desks. So that was really, really helpful and really useful. Secondly, we issued a press release in order to maximise the publicity. And thirdly, we organised a demonstration outside the UK Border Agency to make a bit of a noise about this. So doing all these things at once, in the space of 2 or 3 days, gave us the element of surprise. They simply didn't see us coming. We got some really good publicity, particularly in Community Care magazine and in the local media, who produced our press release word for word. It was surprising what we seemed to face very little resistance. And the council refused to comment to the press. So we made all the running on it. Now, here's a bit of the cover we had. Interestingly, if you notice, the first time, a protest against radical cuts. They used that word radical again. Here it is, being used in, a way that I was saying at the beginning is quite problematic. So what happened, as a result of our campaign, to cut quite a long story short, the council responded by developing a policy. So this is an extract from the policy, which they put out pretty quickly, as we understand it. And it has some principles about the policy applies equally to citizen and refugee young people, completely contradicting the thing that had been passed in the council. It's I'll see this bit in the bottom. You see it? I'm sorry. Anyway, basically it was saying that young people shouldn't leave unless they're ready, and they shouldn't leave unless it's been agreed and recommended by a statutory looked after children do exactly what it says in the regulations, And surprise, surprise, almost all of this policy, coincidentally, seemed to reflect more or less everything we've been saying in our guidance notes that we've been putting around the departments and on social workers' desks. So it left social workers no uncertainty about it, that they could only ask young people to leave if they wanted to. So we think that was a bit of a success. Right, I've only got 2 minutes, so I really want to tell you about G4S. G4S is described by the Institute of Race Relations as the world's largest private army. It's got contracts worth 600 million in this country alone. What is also less known about G4S is that it has a very poor human rights record. For example, Gareth White, aged 15, died in April 2004 when being restrained by staff at Rainswood. G4S runs the Cedars, along with Bernardo's, some people you might know about that, in a so-called pre-departure accommodation for families being deported. The prison inspector found that 2 children had been escorted using physical controlling care techniques. In these cases, the inspector said force was used to effect removal rather than to prevent harm. G4S also holds a 90% ownership of G4S Israel, which supplies security apparatus and equipment for Israeli prisons. Israeli prisons are notorious for holding children, Palestinian children prisoners, and taking them out of the West Bank and holding them in complete and utter breach of the Geneva Convention. So there's all sorts of things. G4S is a nasty, nasty company. Now we discovered that G4S had been sponsoring the Social Work of the Year Award. We thought that for a profession that upheld human rights as one of its overarching principles, it was the absolute height of hypocrisy to entertain a company like G4S as one of its sponsors. Principles of human rights and social justice are absolutely fundamental. We talked a little bit about this in the AGM a bit earlier, in terms of the International Federation of Social Works. So why shouldn't it? What were they doing? What were they doing? Allowing G4S this sort of pre-publicity. Now G4S, of course, they've got 5 children's homes at the moment. They're trying to get a foot in the market, and obviously by sponsoring something like the Social Work of the Year Award, it's good publicity. It's part of their marketing strategy. So we thought if we could try and snuff this, it would dealt them with a bit of a blow. So we are starting to organise a campaign, and we started by simply writing a letter to the organisers, we've got the letter on the website if anyone wants to see it, and of course the organisers' reply. So I'll just read you out the reply here. See it on the left of the slide. It's the beginning of our letter on the left. You probably can't see that very well. Dear Mr. Lavalette, we've got Michael to write it for us. Thank you for your letter dated blah 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 blah. The awards recognise the achievements and best practice by individual practitioners and social work teams throughout England. As a registered charity, we rely on sponsorship to support this work. We are actively seeking category sponsorship from organisations across the private and public voluntary sector, although no sponsors have yet been conferred for 2012. That's all they had to say about it. We'd written them 3 or 4 pages of evidence about G4S, and that is all they had to say about it. It's absolutely disgraceful. Right, I've got to sum up. We did work, again, to cut a long story short, we did a lot of lobbying, and we managed to have a bit of a dialogue with BASRA, because BASRA have got the name to this letter, shamefully at the time. Hilton Dawson, who subsequently seemed to have disappeared. But, I mean, there are people in BASRA that took this issue seriously, and they agreed to take it up, and they had a position on the board at this award, and they successfully managed to persuade the board not to accept any sponsorship for G4S. So I think that was a very useful connection with BASWA and a very useful thing that they did. So and thankfully G4S are no longer sponsoring the Social Work Award. Thank you very much.